Analyzing on the Rainy River by me, Amateur, and Joshin. Discuss the ideas developed by the text on the Rainy River about an individual's response to the tension between urgency and patience. Before we outline our CRT, we have to refresh the story a bit. So, refreshing the story, On the Rainy River is a short story by Tim O'Brien that links to other stories in a collection called The Things They Carried. Tim is lingering between following his draft notice for the Vietnam War or escaping to Canada. In 1968, O'Brien struggled with the conflict between societal norms and the values of his settled traditional life. He can be seen fighting his internal conflicts at a cabin at the Rainy River through self reflection and interaction with Elroy, aka the old guy.
Short story "On the Rainy River" by Tim O'Brien was about the internal conflicts Tim had to face. Knowing that our hook can be put together as, imagine standing on the edge of a life-altering decision, torn between the pressure to act now and the desire to take a step back from the expectations and live life your way. That's a strong hook that briefly gives insight to our CRT's outline. Plan of development. We will start with a brief summary on Tim's conflict and then the motivations that drove Tim, like the expectations to live up to societal norms and the looming experiences Tim had at the cabin that helped him discover courage. Finally, we can discuss the impact the draft notice had on Tim and the dilemma of trying to balance both urgent war and patient life in his journey. Using our hook and plan of development, we can complete a thesis. Imagine standing on the edge of a life-changing choice, torn between the pressure to act now and the desire to take a step back and live life your way. In the short story On the Rainy River, it discusses the ideas that an individual's response to the tension between urgency and patience can only be magnified when trying to balance both.
That brings us to our first body paragraph. The main idea will be how Tim is faced with a difficult decision and his choices are shaped by both norms and pressure of society and the fear of the Vietnam War. The first quote helps back societal pressure. The quote emphasizes the internal struggle of Tim as he's conflicted with the society's demands of duty and honor. The quote portrays Tim's sacrifice of his settled life to comply with the war. The second quote is about societal expectations. It highlights the burden of expectation society holds for each individual, which to Tim only makes him feel like an outcast who feels disconnected. Tim lingers on the fence between joining the war or being criticized and mocked for the rest of his life. The third quote is about the looming threat of the war and how its self-perfection clashes with the reality of the war. He speaks of his identity to make sense why he should not participate in the war.
Our second body paragraph is taking refuge in a cabin near the Rainy River and how it marks a crucial moment of self reflection for O'Brien. Bravery wrestles with the fine line between acting urgently and being patient. Our first quote explains the discovery of courage. So he sits in a boat and he watches the river and he tries to imagine what it would be like to row across to Canada. But then he realizes that he can't. This quote shows ignition of courage because for an individual to know and understand their limits, it takes a lot of self awareness. And knowing your limits and be able to understand that, oh, I can't do this, takes a lot of courage because if you can't accept it, then you're going to dig a deeper hole. Our second quote is explaining how he balances urgency and patience. In this quote, O'Brien is torn between the need to act quickly and the importance of carefully weighing his choices. Although he feels the urge to react impulsively, he shows self control and decides to wait. emphasizing the balance he has in his actions. Our third quote is self reflection. It's a tiny quote, but it says a lot. I was a coward, I went to the war. So, this explains Tim's inner struggle as he grapples with the consequences of his choice to follow through with the draft. It reveals to be a bit ironic because he's reflecting upon himself to be a coward, even though he went to the war. Because last time I checked, going to war was like a feat of bravery. But he's a coward in the sense that he felt prey to societal norms and he couldn't be brave enough to live life his way. Our third body paragraph is the impact the draft notice had on Tim, creating a dilemma of trying to balance both urgent call to war and patient life in his journey. Our first quote is the introduction of the dilemma. It's where he says he's a liberal, and if they want someone to go to war, why not bring some cavemen, right? So this quote establishes the foundation for O'Brien's dilemma, emphasizing the inner struggle he faces while balancing his own principles with the expectations of society. It lays the groundwork for the central idea of the short story because it introduces the clash of self identity, social expectations, and free will. Our second quote is how the dilemma gets magnified. It's towards the beginning where he confesses that he hasn't told anyone. The quote magnifies the fact that going to the war was not mentally haunted him. What haunts him is the dilemma of balancing the urgency with desire for a patient approach to life. His actions led to a permanent engraving in his life that can still be seen as he's still confessing through the way of writing this short story. Our third quote is the impact the dilemma had. So, this was where his internal conflict leads to a feeling of detachment from both himself and the people around him. He experiences alienation from his own values and self identity. This sense of alienation intensifies his isolation and magnifies his belief of being caught in an unsolvable dilemma. The dilemma is unsolvable because even though he went to war, he won that battle of not wanting to go to war because he was scared, but he lost the battle of being himself, having free will, because he fell prey to the pressures of society. So the dilemma is still there, but he's just confessing the part where he's moved on from the war.